The pristine white yacht glided smoothly through the crystal-clear waters of the Maldives, carrying its passengers toward the exclusive Ocean Breeze Resort. Among them sat Priya Kapoor, her perfectly manicured nails drumming impatiently against her designer handbag. At 45, she had worked her way up to become one of the most successful tech executives in Silicon Valley, and she made sure everyone knew it. As the yacht approached the resort's private dock, Priya was already on her phone, barking orders to her assistant back in California. "I don't care if it's 3 a.m. there, Thomas. That deal needs to be closed before the market opens." She ended the call with an exasperated sigh, drawing curious glances from other guests. The welcoming team stood ready at the dock, their crisp white uniforms practically glowing in the tropical sun. A young man stepped forward, his name tag reading Raj, and offered a warm smile. "Welcome to Ocean Breeze Resort, Ms. Kapoor. We're delighted to have you with us." Priya barely acknowledged him as she scrutinized the welcome drink presented to her. "This isn't the coconut water I specifically requested in my pre-arrival form. And where are the fresh orchids that were supposed to be in it?" Raj's smile never wavered, though a flicker of concern crossed his eyes. "My sincere apologies, Ms. Kapoor. We have your preferred coconut water waiting in your villa, along with a special selection of tropical flowers." The resort's golf cart whisked them away along winding paths bordered by lush tropical gardens. Despite the breathtaking views of turquoise lagoons and swaying palm trees, Priya's attention remained fixed on her phone, occasionally muttering about poor signal strength. When they reached her luxury overwater villa, Priya's inspection began immediately. She ran her finger along the marble countertops, checked the temperature of the private infinity pool, and tested every light switch. The villa was a masterpiece of luxury design, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic ocean views and a glass floor section showing colorful fish swimming below. "The room temperature is 2 degrees warmer than I requested," she announced, turning to Raj and the 2 other staff members who had accompanied them. "And this welcome fruit basket, I specifically said no melons. Does anyone actually read the guest preference forms here?" The housekeeping supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Min, stepped forward apologetically. "We'll adjust the temperature right away, Ms. Kapoor. And I'll personally arrange a new fruit basket according to your preferences." "See that you do," Priya replied curtly. "And these pillows feel too soft. I need them firmer, the exact firmness I specified in my form. Also, the orchids in this arrangement are clearly not fresh enough. They should have been cut this morning." As the staff hurried to address her concerns, Priya walked onto the private deck and surveyed the ocean view with a critical eye. A small school of dolphins played in the distance, but instead of enjoying the magical moment, she was already composing a lengthy email to the resort's management about their shortcomings. Within the hour, a parade of staff members had cycled through her villa, a maintenance technician to adjust the air conditioning, a housekeeping team with new pillows, the flower arranger with fresh orchids, and even the chef himself to discuss her dietary requirements in detail. "I expect everything to be perfect during my stay," she informed the restaurant manager, who had come to confirm her dinner reservation. "I'm here to relax, not to deal with incompetence. I've paid enough to warrant proper service." What Priya didn't notice was the supple exchange of glances between the staff members, their professional demeanor masking years of experience dealing with similar guests. They had seen it all before: the demands, the complaints, the need to assert status through criticism. But they also knew something Priya didn't. Life had a funny way of teaching unexpected lessons, and her stay at Ocean Breeze Resort was about to become much more memorable than she had planned. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Priya stood on her deck preparing for dinner. She changed into an expensive designer dress and was checking her reflection in the window when her phone rang again. Another crisis at work, another opportunity to remind everyone of her importance. Little did she know that her upcoming dinner at the resort's signature restaurant would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about success, respect, and true worth. The resort's signature restaurant, Pearl, was already buzzing with activity as the sun dipped below the horizon. Soft lighting from elegant chandeliers cast a warm glow over the space, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the starlit ocean. the gentle sound of waves mixed with quiet conversation and the occasional clink of fine china. Priya arrived exactly at 7:30 p.m., her heels clicking against the hardwood floors as she followed the host to her preferred table, the best in the house, of course. She'd made sure to specify that in her reservation. The table offered an unobstructed view of both the ocean and the rest of the restaurant, perfect for seeing and being seen. "Your server will be with you shortly," the host said with a polite bow, pulling out her chair. "I expect your best server," Priya replied, not bothering to look up from her phone. Not some trainee who doesn't know a Bordeaux from a Burgundy. A few minutes later, a young woman approached the table. Her name tag read Aisha, and she carried herself with quiet confidence despite her youth. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her dark hair neatly tied back, and her smile genuine. "Good evening, Miss Kapoor. Welcome to Pearl. My name is Aisha, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you off with something to drink? Our sommelier has just added some excellent new wines to our collection." Priya gave Aisha a quick once-over, her lips pursing slightly. "I'll have the 2015 Chateau Margaux. I assume you know which one I'm talking about." "Of course, Ms. Kapoor." "An excellent choice. The 2015 was an exceptional year for Bordeaux, particularly for Chateau Margaux. Would you like a moment with the menu while I fetch your wine?" Priya raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised by Aisha's knowledge but unwilling to show it. "Fine. And make sure the wine is served at exactly 18 degrees Celsius, not 17, not 19. As Aisha walked away, Priya observed the other diners. A honeymoon couple lost in each other's eyes, a family celebrating what appeared to be a graduation, a group of business executives engaged in casual conversation. Everyone seemed to be enjoying their evening, but Priya was already finding things to critique in her mental review of the restaurant. Aisha returned with the wine, presenting it with professional grace. Her movements were precise as she showed the label, opened the bottle, and poured a small amount for Priya to taste. Everything was done by the book, but Priya was determined to find fault. "It's been opened too long," she declared after barely tasting it. "Bring another bottle." Without a hint of frustration, Aisha went to fetch a new bottle. When she returned, she repeated the process flawlessly. This time, Priya couldn't find fault with the wine itself, but as Aisha began to pour the full glass, her hand trembled slightly. A single drop, barely visible, landed on the pristine white tablecloth. Priya's eyes locked onto that tiny spot like a hawk spotting its prey. "Did you just spill wine on my table?" Her voice carried across the restaurant, causing several nearby conversations to halt. "I apologize, Miss Kapoor. Let me get that cleaned up right away," Aisha responded calmly, reaching for her service cloth. "Do you have any idea how much this dinner costs?" Priya's voice grew louder. "I'm not paying these prices to be served by someone who can't even pour wine properly. Get me your manager. Now." The restaurant had grown quiet enough that everyone could hear the exchange. The honeymoon couple stopped their conversation mid-sentence. The family celebration turned awkward as the graduates' parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even the business executives paused their discussion to watch the scene unfold. "Of course, Ms. Kapoor. I'll get the manager right away," Aisha replied, her voice steady despite the public humiliation. She turned to leave, her back straight and her head held high, though anyone looking closely might have noticed her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "And don't come back to my table," Priya called after her. "I want a real professional serving me, not some amateur who probably learned about wine from YouTube videos." What Priya didn't notice was the quiet dignity in Aisha's departure or the way other staff members moved to support their colleague with subtle nods and gentle touches as she passed. She didn't see the respect Aisha had earned among her co-workers or the way regular guests at nearby tables shook their heads in disapproval at Priya's behavior. Most importantly, Priya had no idea that this moment, this single drop of wine and her explosive reaction to it, would soon come back to play a crucial role in her own life. As she sat there, feeling righteous in her anger and superior in her status, the universe was already setting in motion events that would teach her an unforgettable lesson about humanity, humility, and the true meaning of class. The restaurant manager was already making his way toward her table, his experienced face masking his thoughts. Behind him, through the restaurant's grand windows, The Maldivian stars continued their eternal dance over the Indian Ocean, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. The restaurant manager, Mr. Chen, approached Pryor's table with the practiced calm of someone who had handled countless difficult situations. His perfectly tailored suit and graceful movement spoke of decades in luxury hospitality. Behind him, other diners watched the scene unfold while pretending not to stare. "Ms. Kapoor, I understand there's been an issue with the service. How may I help?" Mr. Chen's voice was soft but professional. Pryor had already pulled out her phone and was recording. "This is completely unacceptable," she announced, her voice pitched to carry. "I'm paying top dollar at what's supposed to be a 5-star resort, and your server can't even pour wine without making a mess." Mr. Chen glanced at the tablecloth, where the single drop of wine was barely visible. "I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. I'd be happy to move you to another table, or perhaps..." "Another table?" Pryor cut him off with a laugh that contained no humor. "No, what I want is a new server. And I want that girl," she pointed toward where Aisha stood near the service station, "to understand that this kind of incompetence has consequences." She raised her phone higher, making sure to capture both Mr. Chen and Aisha in the frame. "I have over 2 million followers on social media. How do you think they'll react when they see the kind of service you're providing? This could go viral in hours." The honeymoon couple at the next table exchanged glances and quietly asked for their check. The young woman whispered something to her new husband, looking at Pryor with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Ms. Kapoor," Mr. Chen began again, "I understand your concerns. However, I must ask you to stop recording. It's against our privacy policy to film other guests or staff members." "Privacy policy?" Pryor scoffed. "I'll tell you what's against policy. Hiring people who aren't qualified to work in a place like this." She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Look at her uniform. There's a wrinkle on the sleeve. And her shoes aren't properly polished. These are basic things." Aisha remained at her station, her face composed despite the public criticism. A senior server, Mrs. Patel, had placed a supportive hand on her shoulder, but Aisha stood straight, refusing to be diminished by the assault on her character. "In my company," Pryor continued, walking toward Aisha while still recording, "this kind of sloppiness would get someone fired immediately. Do you know how much damage one incompetent employee can do to a brand's reputation?" Several phones around the restaurant had come out, but they weren't filming Aisha's supposed incompetence, they were recording Pryor's behavior. The graduating family's daughter whispered to her mother, "Mom, isn't that the tech CEO who was in the news last month for?" Mr. Chen stepped smoothly between Pryor and Aisha. "Ms. Kapoor, I must insist that you stop recording. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, I'm happy to assist you with that process. However, we cannot allow any guest to harass our staff members." "Harass?" Pryor's voice rose even higher. "I'm simply pointing out the obvious. Do you know who I am? I could buy this entire resort if I wanted to." At that moment, Aisha stepped forward, her voice quiet but clear. "Ms. Kapoor, I apologize again for the spilled wine. Would you allow me to share something with you?" The restaurant fell silent. Mr. Chen looked surprised. It wasn't usual for servers to address angry guests directly in such situations. But there was something in Aisha's demeanor that made him pause instead of intervening. "My mother always told me that true excellence isn't about never making mistakes," Aisha continued, her voice steady. "It's about how we handle them when they happen. I made a mistake with your wine, and I'm truly sorry for that. But I wonder, what would your millions of followers think about how you're handling it?" The simple dignity in Aisha's voice seemed to fill the room. Several guests nodded in approval. The business executives, who had been watching the scene unfold, were now whispering among themselves, one of them frantically typing on his phone. Pryor opened her mouth to respond, but for the first time that evening, no words came out. The phone in her hand suddenly felt heavy, and she became acutely aware of the many eyes watching her, not with admiration or fear as she was used to, but with something that looked uncomfortably like disappointment. The gentle sound of waves continued outside, a stark contrast to the tension in the room. A cool breeze drifted in from the ocean, carrying with it the scent of salt and tropical flowers. In that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere. Though none of them knew it yet, This confrontation was about to take an unexpected turn that would change both women's lives forever. Mr. Chen cleared his throat, about to speak again, when a commotion at the restaurant entrance drew everyone's attention. A distinguished-looking woman had just arrived, her presence commanding immediate respect. As she surveyed the scene before her, a small smile played at the corners of her mouth, a smile that suggested she knew something no one else in the room did. The distinguished woman who had just entered Pearl Restaurant was Dr. Amara Patel, one of the world's leading neurosurgeons. Her presence immediately commanded attention, though not in the loud way Priya demanded it. There was something in her elegant bearing and quiet confidence that naturally drew people's eyes. She paused at the entrance, taking in the scene before her. Priya with her phone still raised, Mr. Chen standing protectively near Aisha, and the restaurant full of tense onlookers. Dr. Patel's expression remained neutral, but her eyes sparkled with something that looked almost like amusement. "Mother," Aisha said softly, "I wasn't expecting you until later." The word mother seemed to echo through the restaurant. Priya's phone lowered slightly as confusion crossed her face. The business executives at their table suddenly sat up straighter, one of them nearly spilling his wine. Dr. Patel walked toward them, her heels making no sound on the polished floor. "I finished my keynote at the medical conference early," she said, her voice warm but carrying a natural authority. "I thought I'd surprise you." She turned to Mr. Chen with a smile. "I hope you don't mind me dropping in to see my daughter during a shift." Mr. Chen bowed slightly. "Of course not, Dr. Patel. It's an honor to have you here." Priya's expression shifted from confusion to shock as recognition dawned. After all, Dr. Amara Patel's face had been on the cover of Time magazine just last month, celebrating her groundbreaking work in neurosurgery and her humanitarian efforts in developing countries. "Your daughter?" Priya's voice had lost its earlier commanding tone. "Yes," Dr. Patel replied pleasantly. "Ishad is taking a gap year before starting medical school at Stanford. She insisted on working here to understand different perspectives in life." She looked at her daughter with pride. "I wasn't sure about it at first, but she made an excellent point. How can you truly serve people if you don't understand their various walks of life?" The graduating family's daughter gasped audibly. "Oh my God," she whispered to her parents. "I just read about them in my pre-med newsletter." Dr. Patel developed that new surgical technique for treating brain aneurysms, and her daughter Aisha got perfect scores on her MCATs. Priya's phone had disappeared into her purse now, her face flushing red. The realization was sinking in. She had just spent the last 15 minutes attempting to humiliate someone who would likely be performing brain surgery in a few years. "We believe in understanding life from all angles," Dr. Patel continued, seemingly oblivious to Priya's discomfort. "Money, status, power, these things come and go. But how we treat others, especially those we think can't benefit us," she let the sentence hang in the air meaningfully. One of the business executives stood up suddenly. "Dr. Patel, I didn't realize it was you. I'm on the board at Metropolitan Hospital. Your research has been revolutionary." He glanced at Priya, then back to Dr. Patel. "Would you and your daughter join us for dinner? We'd love to hear more about your latest work." "Thank you, but I'm here to spend time with my daughter," Dr. Patel declined graciously. "Perhaps another time." She turned to Aisha. "Sweetheart, when does your break start?" "In about 10 minutes, Mother," Aisha replied, still maintaining her professional demeanor despite the revealed truth about her background. The honeymoon couple, who had been about to leave, settled back into their seats, clearly not wanting to miss whatever might happen next. The wife was typing rapidly on her phone, probably sharing the story on social media, though not in a way Priya had initially planned to do. "Excellent," Dr. Patel said. "I'll wait at the bar." "Oh, and Ms. Kapoor?" She turned to face Priya directly for the first time. "I believe I saw your company's presentation at the Tech Innovation Summit last month. Fascinating work you're doing with artificial intelligence in healthcare. Though I must say, no AI can replace the human touch in medicine, or in hospitality for that matter. It's all about empathy, wouldn't you agree?" The irony of her words hung heavy in the air. Priya stood frozen, her earlier confidence evaporated. Here she was, having just threatened to use her social media influence to harm a young woman's career, only to discover that the mere waitress she tried to humiliate was connected to someone whose influence in the medical world far exceeded her own in tech. But what really struck Priya wasn't the revelation of Aisha's privileged background, it was the realization that Aisha had never needed to rely on that background to maintain her dignity. Even when being berated and filmed, she had remained professional and composed, showing more class in her restraint than Priya had shown in all her expensive displays of status. As Dr. Patel made her way to the bar, the restaurant slowly returned to its normal atmosphere of quiet conversation and tinkling glasses. But something had shifted in the air. A lesson about assumptions, humanity, and true dignity had played out before their eyes. What no one in the restaurant knew yet was that this evening's events would soon become even more significant, as fate had a few more surprises in store, particularly for Priya. The morning sun had barely risen over the Ocean Breeze Resort when the first signs of trouble began. Priya woke in her luxury villa with a pounding headache unlike anything she'd ever experienced. The gentle lapping of waves against the stilts of her overwater villa, which had been soothing the previous day, now felt like hammer blows against her skull. She reached for her phone to call her assistant, but the screen's brightness sent sharp pains through her head. The room seemed to spin as she tried to sit up. "It's probably just stress," she muttered to herself, trying to maintain her usual composure. Or maybe too much wine from last night. Last night. The memory of her behavior at the restaurant flooded back, bringing with it a wave of embarrassment that only intensified her headache. She'd spent a sleepless night tossing and turning, replaying the scene in her mind, her very public attempt to humiliate a waitress who turned out to be Dr. Patel's daughter. Pushing herself to stand, Priya stumbled slightly. The world tilted at an odd angle, and dark spots danced in her vision. She managed to reach the bathroom, gripping the marble countertop for support. The face that stared back at her in the mirror was alarmingly pale. "I just need some coffee," she told her reflection. But as she turned to reach for the room's phone, a sharp pain shot through her head like lightning. The bathroom floor seemed to rush up to meet her as her legs gave way. Through a haze of pain, she heard herself cry out. The sound seemed distant, as if coming from somewhere else. She was vaguely aware of her hand knocking over the designer toiletries as she fell, sending them clattering to the floor. Thankfully, Min, the housekeeping supervisor from yesterday, had been passing by the villa on her morning rounds. Hearing the crash and cry, she immediately used her master key to enter. "Miss Kapoor," Min called out. "Is everything all right?" When she found Priya collapsed on the bathroom floor, Min's years of training kicked in. She immediately radioed for emergency medical help while checking Priya's vital signs. "Stay with me, Miss Kapoor," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "Help is coming." The resort's medical team arrived within minutes. Dr. Kumar, the resident physician, quickly assessed Priya's condition. His expression grew serious as he checked her pupils and blood pressure. "We need to get her to a hospital immediately," he announced. "These symptoms suggest a possible aneurysm." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The resort's emergency protocols swung into action with practiced efficiency. A speedboat was prepared to transport Priya to the nearest hospital on the main island, while the medical team stabilized her for transport. Throughout it all, Priya drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain in her head was now overwhelming, making it difficult to focus on anything else. But in her moments of clarity, she was struck by the gentleness with which the resort staff, the same people she'd treated so dismissively yesterday, now cared for her. Min had stayed by her side, holding her hand and speaking soft words of encouragement. The same housekeeping team she criticized for the pillow firmness now carefully carried her to the waiting stretcher. Even Mr. Chen from the restaurant had appeared, coordinating with the mainland hospital and ensuring everything possible was being done for her. As they loaded her onto the speedboat, Priya managed to whisper, "I'm sorry, about yesterday." But Min just squeezed her hand. "Save your strength, Ms. Kapoor. That's all that matters now." The boat cut through the morning waves at top speed, sending spray into the air that caught the early sunlight like scattered diamonds. Under different circumstances, it would have been a beautiful sight. Now it was just a race against time. At the mainland hospital, the emergency team was waiting. As they rushed Priya through the corridors on a gurney, she caught fragments of urgent medical discussion above her. Symptoms consistent with a berry aneurysm, needs immediate surgery, call the specialist. Then, through her pain-fogged vision, Priya saw a familiar face looking down at her. It was Dr. Patel, but not as she'd appeared in the restaurant last night. Now she wore surgical scrubs, her expression focused and professional. "Ms. Kapoor," Dr. Patel said clearly, "you have an aneurysm that requires immediate surgery. I'm the most qualified surgeon available on the island right now. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Priya, even through her pain. The woman whose daughter she tried to humiliate was now literally holding her life in her hands. A tear rolled down her cheek, from pain or emotion, she wasn't sure anymore. "Please," Priya managed to whisper, reaching for Dr. Patel's hand. "I trust you." As the anesthesia began to take effect, Priya's last conscious thought was of Aisha's words from the previous night. True excellence isn't about never making mistakes. It's about how we handle them when they happen. The universe, it seemed, had decided to give Priya a profound lesson in humility, one that would either change her life forever or end it. As she drifted into unconsciousness, the operating room lights bright above her, she had no way of knowing which outcome awaited her on the other side of this unexpected twist of fate. The steady beeping of medical monitors filled the recovery room as Priya slowly regained consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open to a world that seemed softer somehow, less sharp around the edges. The first thing she noticed was that the terrible headache was gone, replaced by a gentle throb that felt more like a reminder than a threat. A nurse sat nearby, checking readings on various machines. When she noticed Priya was awake, she smiled warmly. "Welcome back, Ms. Kapoor. How are you feeling?" Priya tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. The nurse quickly offered her some ice chips, holding them to her lips with a gentleness that reminded her of how Min had held her hand during the emergency. Such simple kindness, freely given, why had she never noticed how precious that was before? The surgery was successful, the nurse explained, adjusting Priya's pillows. "Dr. Patel did an amazing job. You were very lucky. She used a new technique she developed herself. Not many surgeons can perform it yet." Dr. Patel. The memory of their last encounter in the restaurant crashed back into Priya's mind, followed by the bizarre twist of fate that had put her life in the hands of the woman whose daughter she'd tried to humiliate. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. As if summoned by these thoughts, Dr. Patel entered the room. She wore a white coat now instead of surgical scrubs, her manner professional but kind. "Good to see you awake, Ms. Kapoor. The surgery went very well. We caught the aneurysm just in time." Priya tried to sit up, but Dr. Patel gently motioned for her to stay still. "Rest is essential right now. We can talk about the medical details later." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I must say, you've given my daughter quite an interesting story for her medical school applications." The mention of Aisha brought fresh waves of shame to Priya's face. "Dr. Patel, I don't know what to say. After how I behaved." "You were lucky in more ways than one," Dr. Patel interrupted softly. "The nearest other surgeon qualified to perform this procedure was in Singapore. If I hadn't been here for the medical conference," she let the implications hang in the air. Tears welled up in Priya's eyes. "Why did you help me? After what I did?" "Because that's what doctors do," came a voice from the doorway. Aisha stood there, still in her resort uniform, having apparently come straight from her shift. "We help people regardless of who they are or how they've treated us." Priya's tears fell freely now. The sight of Aisha in her waitress uniform, the very thing she'd mocked just yesterday, now seemed to embody a dignity that all her own expensive clothes and accessories couldn't match. "I watched Mother perform surgeries like yours during my internship last summer," Aisha continued, walking into the room. "Every patient on that table is equal. Their bank accounts don't matter. Their social media followers don't matter. In that moment, they're just human beings in need of help." Dr. Patel looked at her daughter with quiet pride. "Aisha insisted on checking on you after her shift. She was quite concerned when she heard about the emergency." The irony of it all hit Priya like a wave. Here was the young woman she'd tried to shame, showing genuine concern for her well-being. The mere waitress she'd looked down upon had more grace and compassion than she'd shown in all her years of corporate success. "I'm so sorry," Priya whispered, her voice cracking. I was horrible to you, to everyone. And now," she gestured weakly at the hospital room, the machines, her own vulnerable state. Aisha stepped closer to the bed. "You know what I've learned from working at the resort? Every guest who acts like you did, they're usually carrying some kind of pain. Sometimes it's loneliness. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes they're just so used to wearing a mask of superiority that they've forgotten how to be real with people." The words hit home with surprising accuracy. When was the last time Priya had allowed herself to be truly vulnerable with anyone? When had she last shown genuine gratitude? When had she last seen the people serving her as actual people, rather than just extensions of the services she paid for? Dr. Patel checked her watch. "I need to make my rounds." "Aisha, don't stay too long. Ms. Kapoor needs her rest." She headed toward the door, then turned back. "Anu and Ms. Kapoor, the resort staff sent these." She pointed to a beautiful arrangement of flowers on the bedside table that Priya hadn't noticed before. The card attached read, "Wishing you a speedy recovery. From your friends at Ocean Breeze Resort." It was signed by everyone, Mr. Chen Min, the housekeeping staff, and all the restaurant team. As Dr. Patel left the room, Priya found herself looking at the flowers through fresh tears. The very people she treated as beneath her had responded to her crisis with kindness and concern. They'd called themselves her friends when she'd never given them any reason to consider her one. The heart monitor's steady beeping continued its rhythm, marking moments that felt increasingly precious. Through the hospital room window, she could see the same ocean that had looked so different from her luxury villa. Somehow, from this new perspective, it seemed even more beautiful, not because of the price she paid to view it, but because of the simple miracle of being alive to see it at all. 1 year later, the Ocean Breeze Resort's main conference room was filled to capacity. Staff members, both current and former, sat alongside guests and medical students. At the podium, Priya stood looking very different from the woman who had arrived at the resort a year ago. Gone were the flashy designer clothes and air of superiority. Instead, she wore a simple but elegant outfit, and her smile reached her eyes as she addressed the crowd. "Welcome to the first annual Service Industry Education Scholarship Ceremony," she began. "It's amazing how life can change in just one moment." In the front row, Aisha sat between her mother and Mr. Chen, now wearing a white coat with Stanford Medical School embroidered on the pocket. Next to them, Min wiped away happy tears as she watched one of her housekeeping staff members walk up to receive a full college scholarship. "A year ago, I thought I knew what success looked like," Priya continued, her voice warm and genuine. "I measured it in stock prices, social media followers, and the number of people who feared my influence. I couldn't have been more wrong." She touched the small scar behind her ear, a reminder of the surgery that had saved her life. "It took a medical emergency to make me see what real success looks like. It looks like a doctor who saves the life of someone who was cruel to her daughter. It looks like resort staff sending flowers to a difficult guest in the hospital. It looks like a young woman working as a waitress not because she has to, but because she wants to understand people better before she treats them." The scholarship program had been Priya's idea, but its implementation had been a team effort. She had worked closely with Dr. Patel and the resort management to create opportunities for service industry workers to pursue higher education. The fund wasn't just about money. It included mentorship programs, flexible work schedules for studying, and guaranteed internships. "Today, we're awarding 10 full scholarships," Priya announced. "But this is just the beginning. Starting next month, we're expanding the program to 5 more resorts across the region." In the audience, one of the business executives who had witnessed the restaurant incident a year ago nudged his colleague. "Remember how we thought she was finished after that video went viral?" he whispered. "Now look, she's turned it into something amazing." Indeed, the video of Priya's behavior had gone viral, but not in the way anyone expected. She had posted it herself, along with a heartfelt message about her experience and transformation. Instead of trying to hide her past behavior, she had used it as a teaching moment, creating a movement about treating service workers with dignity and respect. As the scholarship recipients took their turns at the podium, each sharing their dreams and plans, Priya found herself thinking about how much her own life had changed. Her company was more successful than ever, but now it was known for its ethical treatment of workers and innovative employee education programs rather than just its cutting-edge technology. "The most valuable lesson I learned," Pryor said as she concluded her speech, "is that true class has nothing to do with money or power. It's about how we treat others, especially those we think can't do anything for us. Every person we meet is fighting their own battles, carrying their own dreams. Sometimes they're wearing designer suits, and sometimes they're wearing service uniforms. But they all deserve our respect and kindness." After the ceremony, during the small reception, Pryor found herself standing with Aisha and Dr. Patel near the resort's beach. The same ocean that had witnessed their first unfortunate encounter now provided a peaceful backdrop to their friendship. "I got my first solo surgery next week," Aisha mentioned, her eyes bright with excitement. "A simple procedure, but still." "You'll do wonderfully," Pryor assured her. "Though I hope you don't mind if I request a different surgeon if I ever need another one. I don't want to make things awkward for you." They all laughed, the kind of warm laughter that only comes from people who have been through something meaningful together. Dr. Patel's eyes twinkled as she added, "Well, I'm semi-retired now anyway, teaching the next generation, spending more time with family." Speaking of teaching, Pryor said, "The resort's new staff training program starts next month. Would you both be willing to share your story again? It really helps drive home the message about dignity and respect." A young waitress approached with a tray of drinks. Pryor thanked her by name, asked about her online classes, which the scholarship program was funding, and made sure to look her in the eye with genuine interest as they chatted briefly. As the sun began to set over the ocean, casting its golden light across the water, the three women raised their glasses in a quiet toast. They didn't need to say what they were celebrating. The transformation of one woman's worst moment into something that would help countless others chase their dreams. In the distance, new guests were arriving at the resort by yacht, just as Pryor had a year ago. But now, thanks to the changes she had helped implement, they would find a different kind of luxury waiting for them. One measured not just in thread counts and wine vintages, but in the dignity and opportunity afforded to every person who worked there. The story of the rich woman who humiliated a waitress had become something else entirely, a testament to the power of humility, the strength of forgiveness, and the amazing things that can happen when people choose to learn and grow from their mistakes rather than be defined by them.